I think all we need is to have the smooth jazz retracted. Is it only me hearing it? That's a problem if it is. All right, good morning. My name is Jonathan Zittrain, and I want to welcome you to the inaugural meeting of the Open Internet Advisory Committee. Our Twitter hashtag by self-declaration is OIAC, because apparently someone else has claimed Open Internet. I should alert everyone. First, welcome to the public who is attending. I'm glad to see the rule of universities that nobody ever likes to sit in the front row holds true in real life as well. And also alert everybody that we are webcasting live in HD and surround sound, so I hope people have broadband on the open internet. With that said, I would like to turn it immediately over to our fearless leader, Chairman Julius Janikowski of the Commission, for our charge. Julius, welcome.
Jonathan, well, thank you, and thank you to everyone who's here. I just have a few notes by way of welcome. First of all, this is not internet casual, what I am wearing today. It is the product of absent-mindedness. I left my jacket at home. But it does cause me to want to let you all know that internet casual is perfectly fine for any meeting of the Open Internet Advisory Committee. I am really pleased that you're all here, that you're participating in this effort, that we're having this meeting. I'm so grateful to Jonathan Zittrain, who has agreed to chair this effort. Jonathan, I think all of you already know Jonathan already, but Jonathan has an absolutely incredible background, distinguished career before even getting into teaching. Did some interesting work on the Hill, has become one of the most popular and innovative law professors in the country, very active somehow in finding time not only to teach, to lead new approaches and using technology to teach, to write. Many of you, if not most of you, have read Jonathan's last wonderful book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It. Just an incredible, illuminating work. And you may not know that Jonathan is working on a new book now. It's called The Future of Over-the-Top Introductions and How to Stop Them. But Jonathan, thank you for taking on this role. We've been fortunate at the FCC to have a number of advisory committees that have really added value. And one of the things that I've seen and how that comes about is that there are a few essential components. One of them is having a good collection of people on a committee who bring a similar spirit. I'll talk about that in a minute. Another is the person who is chairing, and Dave, I'll come to you in a minute, the person who is vice chairing the process and leading it. It takes time, it takes commitment, it takes vision. Appreciate it very much. Of course, the third ingredient to a successful committee like this is to have effective bridges with the commission itself. And we've learned from our experiences, and we found that if you put a good group of people together, but there isn't a good channel of communication with the agency, well, then it can fail for that reason too. And so I'm very pleased that Daniel Kirshner, who I hope all of you meet if you haven't met him already, is going to be the key point person. He won't be the only person from the commission staff engaging with the committee, but Daniel will be your point person. And I'm very pleased about that. It is great to have Dave Clark here. Dave, one of the lions of the Internet. I think that everyone who's here is representing themselves, but of course many people here come from different organizations and companies, and I understand that. In some ways Dave is really the only person here I guess with Jonathan, who's really representing himself and his experience and his views and his commitment to the successful future of this wonderful thing that he helped invent. And so we're honored to have David Clark and Jonathan Zittrain leading this effort. And I want to thank all of you for participating in this. It's really an extraordinary group. I won't take the time to list each of you by name, but the list is widely available. It's public. Everyone will see it. Maybe it's scrolling on the bottom of the screen. But it's really an extraordinary group who is here with a broad, diverse set of backgrounds, perspectives, interests, and it over-indexes, which is what we wanted, on technical and economic expertise. Now, one thing that I would assert you all share, we all share, is this common purpose: ensuring internet freedom and openness. In the 21st century, there's no disagreement here. The internet is an indispensable platform for innovation, for economic growth, for job creation, for free expression, and for democratic engagement. It is also unleashing unbelievable solutions to challenges that bedevil our country: education, healthcare, energy, public safety. It's, of course, hard, if not impossible, to imagine life today without the internet. The internet's openness and freedom, the ability to speak, innovate, and engage in commerce without having to ask permission, has been essential to the internet's unparalleled success. And that proposition is not controversial today is a testament to the work that all of you have done over the past few years. Now, how we preserve internet freedom and openness, that's been the subject of intense debate. It certainly was the subject of extremely intense debate when I became chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. And at the urging of many people across the ecosystem with very different perspectives, we decided in early 2009 to try to take on this debate. What we were hearing from people who had very different views was this common message. The nature of the disagreement had gotten to the point where it was becoming counterproductive, and that the FCC could play a helpful, important role in making sure that the internet could continue to drive economic growth, opportunities for entrepreneurs, opportunities for free expression, if it jumped in and tried to work with a broad array of stakeholders to adopt a framework that could resolve some of the issues that were being discussed. To develop, this is the request of us, see if you can develop some common sense rules of the road for preserving internet freedom and openness. And we ran a process here. Many of you know it very well. Many of you participated in it for many months. That listened very carefully to a broad range of viewpoints. It was an open process. We got over 100,000 public comments, numerous public workshops across the country, hundreds of meetings with stakeholders representing every possible perspective in the course of about 14 months. And the people around this table, and of course many not here today, were vital contributors to that process and to its positive outcomes. Thanks to your help and the help of many others, the FCC was able to adopt a strong and balanced framework for preserving internet freedom and openness, a framework that received broad support from across the internet ecosystem, from edge companies and constituencies, applications providers, service providers, to also network companies, infrastructure companies, to a broad array of the public interest groups on all sides of this. I'm not claiming 100% support for what we did, but there was overwhelming support that we had adopted a framework that preserved internet freedom, moved the ball forward in a significant way. Part of the goal that we set out when we adopted this framework was to have rules of the road that would incentivize investment and innovation throughout the ecosystem. We had a pretty simple idea on this. If we adopted a set of rules that by their nature, by the incentive structure they created, would dramatically encourage investment to one side of the system, we would have failed. In other words, if we had done something that on its face would have driven all investment to the edge, to apps and services, and would have left network and infrastructure companies with no incentives to invest in their networks, we would have had theoretically nice incentives for entrepreneurship and innovation, and to use a term of art, crappy networks. And the opposite was true as well. If we had adopted a set of frameworks that would have put all of the incentives on investing in the network and in the infrastructure, well, that would have been great. We would have had theoretically very large, robust pipes, and we would have lost this wonderful thing that we have, the innovation and entrepreneurial community that has, and we've seen this now for years, creating these incredible content, services, apps that are fueling the demand for bigger, fatter wired and wireless pipes. Now, when we were debating the framework that we ultimately adopted, we had much participation, and as I mentioned, we had a lot of people who said, you're going in the right direction, this is a good thing, this is going to be a positive for the broadband economy. Of course, we had others who said that if we adopted these rules, the sky would fall. Well, they said that investment would dry up across the internet ecosystem, and these rules that we were debating would kill this incredible thing that in the U.S. we had developed over the last 20 years. The good news is that didn't happen. The sky didn't fall. Investment innovation didn't dry up. In fact, quite the contrary. In the year and a half since we adopted our framework, we've seen increased investment and innovation across the broadband ecosystem. The U.S. apps economy, which barely existed at the start of 2009 when we did this, is now the envy of the world, continues to grow. The innovation is amazing. Experts say that this part of the economy that didn't exist 4 years ago is responsible for the creation of 500,000 new jobs. I think that probably underestimates it. In 2011, venture investment in internet startups reached its highest level since 2001. Clearly, investment in early-stage internet companies is not being deterred. At the same time, annual private investment in wired and wireless broadband networks and infrastructure is also up and up significantly. 30% increase from 2009. The fact is that the internet ecosystem is growing, all of it. The pie is growing. And norms of internet freedom and openness are taking hold. And while these developments are certainly encouraging, we all know that this work isn't done, and that's why we formed this advisory committee. We know this work isn't done for many, many reasons. There were complex issues that we identified at the time we did the order that weren't ripe for resolution. Technology continues to change every day, creating new issues, new problems to solve. So this group that we have formed as our Internet Advisory Committee, it's a group of very different perspectives. And each of you in joining this group knew that you were joining a group of people with very different perspectives. And I appreciate that. You bring to this issue a lot of expertise, technology expertise, economy expertise, looking backward into the history of the Internet and technology, and many of you just real vision into the future to the extent the future can be seen and known. As we formed this advisory committee, announced that we would do it and then put it together, we challenged you as individuals to participate in this process, to look at the issues that arise, and to help develop solutions in the interests of our country, and you responded. When we adopted the Open Internet Order, we knew that continued engagement with key stakeholders would be important, and so the order, as I mentioned, called for the establishment of this advisory committee. I do want to acknowledge my colleague, Commissioner Clyburn, with whom I had many discussions about this as we were working on the order, and she in particular thought this would be a very good idea, an important part of the framework we had put together. And in the order, we said that we wanted this committee to assess the marketplace and the effects of our rules, and to, I'm reading from the order, make recommendations it deems appropriate concerning our open internet framework. Now, my charge to you, on top of what the Commission said in creating this committee, is work together in a spirit of cooperation and fact-based problem solving. I'm convinced that kind of spirit, that kind of approach can solve even the hardest problems, and particularly when it comes from a shared vision of the importance of internet freedom and openness. I think we can make a lot of progress. Now, working with the leadership of the committee, there's been a lot. As you know, there's already been a bunch of work done, and I understand that there are already 4 initial areas that this group is going to divide into. Jonathan will talk more about it. Transparency, mobile, specialized services, and the impact of the open internet framework. I encourage you to view the broader stakeholder community as a resource, and to engage with other groups that have formed since our process began 2 years ago, like the Broadband Internet Technology Advisory Group at UC Boulder. Some of you know this as BTAG. And so this is an effort. There may be a little overlap in membership. Dale Hatfield has organized this at the University of Colorado. It's focused on solving technical challenges in internet network management. It's very heavy on engineering. We don't consider this group as being in competition with that, just the opposite. We think it's complementary. And we think that there may be good opportunities for cross-group engagement. So thank you again to each of you for your service. I do want to say a couple of other things. One is I couldn't believe more strongly that public service in the United States is a big, big deal. In a country that's based on self-government, we cannot succeed if people don't participate in that experiment and in that process. And so I'm always so pleased when people like Daniel, who could be doing anything in his life right now, decide, you know what, I'm going to come to the Commission and do public service. Some of you around this table have done a stint in public service, and I see Henning here too, and I want to acknowledge Henning and the very profound role he has played at the Commission over the last year or so that he's been here, actually 2 years, because he's been doing different things. Henning, one of the just world's great engineers and thinkers when it comes to internet and technology. He's our CTO, and we're very honored to have Henning here. And another person who said, you know what, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and do public service. The way I look at each of you, by electing, and this is voluntary, to do this committee, you're participating in this experiment of public service and self-government. And I appreciate that, and I want you to know that it's appreciated, and I want you to know it's a big deal. And we're committed to doing everything we can on our side to make it a relevant and meaningful exercise of participation in self-government. Now, as you do all your work, I'm going to close on this. There are many different things I could say to you, but I'm going to say this. I'm going to say that you might remember something that Mark Andreessen said. He said, the internet has always been and always be a magic box. And I say that because the internet truly is magical. It is special. It has expanded the possibilities of human achievement. We have, I believe, an obligation to one another and to future generations to ensure that the only limits on an internet user or entrepreneur are the limits of our imagination. I thank you all for participating in this, and I'm really looking forward to the product of your work. Thank you. And what I'm going to do is stay for a few minutes and take a few questions and have a little discussion. My experience in having worked with other successful advisory committees is I'm not going to stay very long today because I want to give Jonathan and Dave and all of you a chance to talk and move forward. I'm looking forward to attending a future meeting for a substantial amount of time. But I think today I want to encourage you to get going without me here. But I'll be watching you on the internet. But I'm happy to take a couple of questions and just chat on any part of our work.
I've got one. So you mentioned fact-based in your opening remarks, and I wonder if maybe you could expand a little more. I'm sure within the committee there will be no dearth of views and kind of opinions expressed on what can be done, what ought to be done, what ought not to be done, and that's all extremely useful. That's part of why we've been gathered together. But on the fact-based part of things, do you see particular areas where we could work to develop a research agenda of sorts, drawing from the backgrounds and expertise of the people around the table here, to help move the ball forward on understanding what's going on out there?
It's a terrific question. There's obviously a lot of data that's out there about what's going on the internet. One of the areas that I think the committee may be able to provide a real value is thinking together about what is it exactly that's relevant to measure in determining internet openness and freedom and seeing where things are going really well, where there might be problems. And so I do think that could be certainly a useful area to at least discuss. What are the kinds of things that we should be measuring on a regular basis? Why do we want to measure those things? How do we make sure we have accurate data? And I think that's something that could be of real value to the Commission if that can be part of your work.
Uh-huh. It's also probably by design that in your opening remarks the words net neutrality were not uttered. And I just wanted to give you a chance to discuss.
That
was mean.
As we jumped into the issue in 2009, one of the things that we discovered was that the term itself may have become counterproductive. Now, different people can disagree with that, and I'm not sure that much really turns on it. But as we begun to think about the different positions that different stakeholders had, what the real issues were, and fundamentally what the real goal was, we realized that, at least to us, this whole effort was about internet freedom and internet openness. Now, giving those phrases color and life is its own challenge. But we found some real utility in focusing on exactly that. We all agree on internet freedom and openness. What is it? And to the point you asked before, well, what is it? What are the basic rules of the road that allow us to make sure it'll be preserved? And now, what are the things we can measure, both with respect to the ongoing freedom and openness of the internet and the challenges that we all should address together.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Harvey?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. From your perspective, what would describe what success would look like from this group in 1 year, 2 years?
In some ways it's like asking what success in the internet would look like in 1 year or 2 years, and I think we've all found in this area that we should be cautious about predicting what the future will be like. I think if in 2 years this group can look back and say that the internet remains free and open, that incentives for innovation and investment are strong throughout the broadband ecosystem, that early stage entrepreneurs and startups know that if they get on the internet they can reach an audience, that infrastructure companies know that they have incentives to invest and get a return on their investment, that speakers know that if they speak on the internet they can reach an audience. If we can say all those things in 2 years, then this will have been a success.
That's a wonderful outcome-based charge rather than process-based, and it's a daunting responsibility. Good one. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question which I guess is The internet has there are many elements in the ecosystem, as you've described. To what extent is our charter limited to, quote, the network, or are we also, in essence, charged to look at activities that are happening at the edge of the network?
I think that's the kind of question that I would encourage the group to discuss. We're want to hear the outcomes of the discussion and the debate about the group, where issues are, what needs to be addressed. So I wouldn't put any artificial limits on the things the group can discuss, and we'll be open-minded. Yes, sir. It's going to be. I'm told this is going to be the last question. But,
excellent! What a privilege. So, in that vein, as the evolution of mobile and fixed networks happens, and that changes rapidly, as mentioned in the order, is it appropriate for the group to look at whether, in fact, the closer ties between those two networks going forward than perhaps envisaged in the text of the order?
You said closer ties?
Closer ties.
Was the question?
Yeah.
I think it's appropriate to look at mobile internet access, to think about the issues there, and to have that be part of what's recommended to us. I understand that one of the subcommittees that the group has already decided to form involves mobile, so that's certainly an area where we'd welcome input. I'm going to apologize. I have to go, but I actually think it's good that I go because I want you to get some work done today. You have a limited amount of time, and I think a lot to do, and just a great group of people here. So again, thank you very, very much for your service, for being willing to do this, for participating in a process itself that's open, that's available to consumers, entrepreneurs, businesses in the United States and all over the world, in fact. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I'm actually told the webcast isn't working right now, which at least means you can't keep an eye on us after you leave the room. So we'll work to get that back up and running. So clearly the endpoints as well as the network are very much of interest. So here's the order that I thought we might undertake for the time we have together today. Up next, we could do a round of introductions around the table, actually get to know each other a little bit. And then we thought it might be useful to have a little bit about what the Open Internet Order says. Its essence is in 2 pages, and Daniel has agreed to discuss a little bit and explicate what's in the order. Then we were thinking we'd turn to David Clark for a little bit of extra context and perhaps history of sorts, and discussion, if desired, around that. And then talk about the working groups, for which those of you around the table, we've already had some tentative engagement around what the working group should be. We should go over each one, and as a collective group, kind of come up with the charge or at least some initial ideas for each of those working groups. And I should say, too, for the 4 working groups that we have tentatively mapped out, we're understanding that could grow or change over time, and in particular, as certain issues come up, there may be some thought of being able to create shorter-lived ad hoc working groups to take on narrower issues as they arise. After that, we'll have an opportunity for public comment, and then we'll break for lunch, and after that have a battery of 2 sets of working group meetings. And we think the way people have been double assigned and such, we've managed to do the math. It was we had a Cray computer working on it. We've managed to make it so that almost everybody will not have to be in 2 places at once as we do a sequence of 2. And I think we owe Charles a thanks for pointing out the problem of quantum duplication to head that off at the pass. So that's pretty much our agenda, and I think maybe we should turn right now just to do a round of introductions, and should turn it over to...
How much introduction do you want so that I can set the proper tone here?
Spoken like a computer scientist. More than name, rank, and serial number. So a little bit more to give a flavor of perhaps some aspect of the path that you figure may have brought you to sitting at this table. And that could be, for those a prior career, 5, yes, please.
So I'm David Clark. I'm at MIT. I came as a graduate student in 1966 and forgot to leave. I'm a soft money faculty member. I got involved in the internet in 1975. I've been involved ever since. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the architecture of the internet. In the 90s, I realized the technologists were no longer in charge. It's Alan Kay who said the best way to predict the future is to invent it, and I realized the best way to predict the future was to figure out who was going to invest in it. So I did the only thing I could as an academic. I hired an economist. I have now completed my descent into multidisciplinary insanity. I just hired a postdoc who's a political scientist, and I've become very concerned with this larger social context and how it shapes the internet itself. So absolutely, as Julia says, I'm here to advocate for the internet. I don't represent any interest. I represent the internet's interest. Sir? Yes.
Hi, I'm Henning Schultzweni. I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer for the Commission. I wear a second hat as a faculty member in the Department of Computer Science at Columbia University. As the Chairman indicated, I had been here last year as well. I'm in a slightly different role, focusing on public safety, but I was also involved in the drafting effort for the Open Internet Order. My background on the technology side has been primarily on application and to some extent transport issues related to Internet applications, standards, and related issues. I've worked in the Internet Engineering Task Force, I think since roughly 1992, working on issues of public safety, voice over IP, multimedia, and related issues. And so I'm a bit between, like Dave was indicating, the policy side and certainly maintain my technology side. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. Alyssa?
I'm Alyssa Cooper. I'm the Chief Computer Scientist at the Center for Democracy and Technology, which is a not-for-profit internet policy organization based here in Washington. My responsibilities at CDT cover a range of different civil liberties issues and internet policy issues. Done some consumer privacy work. I'm on our internet openness team, and as part of that role, I serve on the Broadband Internet Technical Advisory Group, the BTAG, that the chairman referenced earlier. I think I'm one of a couple of people here who have that overlap. And then I also do our technical standards work, which is primarily at the IETF, where I serve on the Internet Architecture Board as well. So that's my day job, and then on the side I'm also a doctoral candidate at the Oxford Internet Institute, where I'm doing a comparative study of internet traffic management in the UK and the US, and some of that might be relevant here as well.
Great. Russ?
Hi, I'm Russ Housley. I have my own company, Vigil Security, which is kind of just me. I have been involved in internet standards since the mid-1980s and chaired the IETF working group on secure electronic mail. That led me to a place where the IETF asked me to become the security area director, and so basically all of the working groups dealing with security were under me. I did that for 4 years. And then for the last 5 years, I've been chairing the IETF. So internet standards has been a significant part of my background.
Michelle?
My name is Michelle Zatlin, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a performance and security service, so we bring the performance and security resources that were previously reserved for only the internet giants to the rest of the web. And so today we provide these services to over 350,000 businesses and websites around the world. And, my role here is that as an entrepreneur, we're a company that has benefited from the free and open web. And so we're very much looking forward to being a part of this.
Dennis?
I'm Dennis Roberson. I'm from Illinois Institute of Technology, though I am representing T-Mobile in this forum. I didn't encounter the internet until 1971, so it's same vintage of David.
It's like instead of the prize for who traveled the farthest.
Yes,
who
exactly.
First heard of the
Exactly.
internet.
Yes.
Right now, Dennis, you're in the lead.
And it wasn't the internet then, as you all know, it was the ARPANET, but at Stanford in those days. I did spend 33 years in industry and finally escaped to academia, and now I'm in my 10th year in academia in computer science, focused on wireless networking.
My name is Matt Larson. I'm the owner of a company called VistaBeam. We're a fixed wireless internet provider. We service about 40,000 square mile area in rural Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado. I'm also here representing the Wireless Internet Service Provider Association. We were founded in 2004 and started having a lot of rapid growth. A big part of the perspective I want to bring to this is what people in rural areas, unserved and underserved areas, need as far as technology and what can be delivered to them.
Hi, good morning. I'm Elaine Paul. I'm from the Walt Disney Company and have come out from Los Angeles. I'm in corporate strategy and M&A at Disney. I've been there the vast majority of my career for 20 plus years. In my course of my work there, I also at one point was the head of business development for Go.com in the late 90s, early 2000s, and spent a good amount of time in Silicon Valley at that point in time. And in the course of my work and our work, we obviously have a lot of activity as a content provider and company that is very active in media and the internet. We've also made a number of acquisitions of entrepreneurs who made very interesting businesses in wireless and internet and apps and all these wonderful opportunities that have been created by this new technology, and have a lot of various company interests and experience with internet delivered video and all these wonderful new things that have been created by this technology. So I look forward to serving on this committee and getting to know you guys.
Kendra.
Hi, I'm Kendra Albert. I work for the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and I'm not on the committee. I'm just here to take notes.
So I'm Brad Burnham, and I work for Union Square Ventures in New York, and we are an early-stage venture capital investor that has invested in a lot of internet services at the application layer. So we're investors in Twitter and Tumblr and Foursquare and Etsy and Indeed and Kickstarter and a number of services that take advantage of the freedom of the internet. But I did start my career at AT&T. I spent 12 years there in a variety of different sales and marketing positions, starting in the late 70s, 79, and then got to watch the development of a number of network services like Net 1000 and ISDN. I also spun two companies out of Bell Laboratories and got to run around the halls of Murray Hill and Homedale quite a bit. And that is what led me to the venture business. I first got into the venture business with AT&T Ventures in 1993, and now have been in my own firm since 2003 when we formed Union Square Ventures.
It's a historic civil rights organization that provides direct services, including STEM and broadband and digital literacy services. We're part of the Broadband Opportunity Coalition and a BTOP grantee. My background is I'm the Director of Research and Policy at the Urban League, and I've had two careers. In my first career, I was a transactions attorney in telecoms and technology. I did mergers and acquisitions mostly, and also network rollout, and then I went back to school. I went back to University of Chicago, and then in my current career, I'm an economist. I do mostly quantitative analysis at the Urban League, and I also cover technology and telecoms policy. So we'll be looking at how to use open internet to sort of drive economic efficiency and economic growth in some of the underutilized regions and communities.
Hi, I'm Harvey Anderson. I guess I first touched the magic box back in '96 when I joined Netscape. Didn't know it was a magic box at the time. But today I serve as the general counsel at Mozilla, and I run our public policy team, our legal team, and our business affairs team. Mozilla is a nonprofit public interest organization that's focused on the open internet, and Mozilla does that through its tools and products, namely Firefox and in the past Thunderbird. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brenda Villanueva, and I'm here with the National Hispanic Media Coalition. I'm actually not part of this committee, so I'm just here to take notes today.
Hi, I'm Jen Rexford. I'm a professor in the computer science department at Princeton, and my research there focuses on network architecture with an emphasis on network management, traditionally focusing more on backbone networks, though more recently on enterprise and data center networks. On the policy side, I'm also involved in the FCC's working group on incremental deployment of BGP security solutions, where I co-chair that group. Happy to be here.
Chuck Kalmanek. I head the research organization in AT&T Labs. Certainly excited about being here. I remember my early days in research at AT&T Labs, having conversations with our executives, at least those executives that would talk to lowly folks like myself about this internet thing being important and something we should get involved in. And I was around when AT&T launched its WorldNet consumer ISP service. So I've kind of watched that history and evolution for many, many years. That technology was dial access. Some of you may remember dial access, some of you may not. So broadband has obviously changed.
The tone of the modem handshake is seared into each of our brains.
There you go.
Pavlovian response.
Personally, I'm a networking person. I consider myself to be a technologist. And although I've spent most of my personal research career in networking, I've also had the good fortune to work with a lot of people that work in software and systems that sit at the edge of the network as well. So I have a broad perspective, probably a jack of all trades and master of none, but certainly the dynamic between what happens at the edge and what happens in the network itself is a very interesting area and one that's evolving. Glad to be here.
I'm Chuck Slocum. I work for the Writers Guild of America in Los Angeles. And like Elaine, I'm here really from a content point of view. Our writers write most of the film and television that is put out of Hollywood and really think very entrepreneurially in a lot of cases. And so I have an MBA. I'm not a writer, so I look at the industry for them. And am very much interested in the opportunities that the internet provides for content creators to get as directly as possible to the audience. So it's very much, my perspective is very much from sort of a strategic or business model point of view.
Hi, I'm Kevin McInerney. I come from Comcast. I run network engineering, so I'm one of the plumbers of the group here. I started my internet career back in the NearNet, SuraNet days, which became BBN Planet, and then moved over to the cable space, which I don't know if any of you have ever had a Land City cable modem, but those ones with the big fins on them. So I've been through startups.
Kept us warm on many a cold night.
Yes. So I've got to see the evolution of broadband from some of the early days, and high interest and near and dear to my heart.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Chip Sharp with Cisco Systems. I was amazed recently to realize I have about 30 years experience in communications. It didn't seem like that long, but about 10 or early years it was in AT&T developing first ISDN adapters, so I spent quite a bit of time working on ISDN and video conferencing at that point. And then in 96 I joined Cisco mainly to help with the dial-up internet access market and helping Cisco in getting into that market. So spent the first half of my time at Cisco working in dial-up internet access, but basically interfacing with the telephone company, how do routers interface with telephone systems. I've also been working in areas such as helping develop internet exchange points in developing countries and least developed countries, and how do we develop the market in those areas. Lately, last year or so, I've been engaged working, preparing for the WICIT, the World Conference on Internet and International Telecommunications, coming up, where we're revising the ITRs. So that's been consuming a lot of my time over the last year or so, and the issues surrounding that. So that's kind of where I'm focused these days. Thank you.
I am Marcus Weldon. I'm the chief technologist for a company called Alcatel-Lucent that builds networks. Actually, we build the equipment, or make the equipment that operators use to build networks, both wireless and wired broadband networks. But apart from being chief technologist, which is sort of my corporate job, I'm a member of Bell Labs, and that's intentional because they like me to be an independent thinker. And as you know, Bell Labs are almost renowned for their independent thought. So as well as sort of being the company's strategist for technology, I'm actually meant to think independently about the future of things. And one of the things I'm very interested in is how tablets, these amazing devices, transform human behavior and bridge wireline and wireless in new and interesting ways. We actually think it's a new generation we call the tablet generation is emerging, that actually is an ageless generation. It's a behavioral generation that will transform how internet services get consumed. And so that's something I'm very interested in exploring here. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, Ken Florence from Netflix. I've been also knocking about internet-related things for quite a while. Started at a community college figuring out how to get their astronomy department hooked up to this new TCP/IP network. Then a place called Navisite, which was one of the early startups involved in internet hosting, and then moved on to Netflix, where I've been for about a decade, and had a front row seat in watching Netflix evolve from a tiny company of a few 100,000 customers to what it is today, one of the largest generators of data on the internet. Also a member of ITAG as well as Alyssa and Chuck or his colleagues. So happy to be here and participate. Thanks.
I'm Deborah Broderson. I'm with the FCC. I'm an attorney in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and when I'm not getting lunch for y'all, hope it works out. We'll see. I drafted the initial version of the open internet provisions in the Comcast NBC order and was involved in the drafting and editing of the open internet rules as well. So it's good to be here and talk about it with people it actually affects.
Hi, I'm Daniel Kirshner. As the chairman mentioned, I'm the designated federal officer for this committee. I work with the commission. I'm in the Office of General Counsel, and I work. I'm primarily focused on internet policy issues.
Great. And as already been said, I'm Jonathan Zittrain. I'm a professor of law and computer science at Harvard, but possibly more relevant to this committee. I signed on CompuServe in 1982, and after running up a huge bill on my parents' credit card, unbeknownst to them, was told I had to stop, and was rescued at the last minute by being offered an assistant sysop-ship on CompuServe in the Texas Instruments Forum. I don't know if people remember the TI 99 4A. Get it at JCPenney for $99. Still a good deal. And it was from that vantage point that I saw from CompuServe everyone, including myself, utterly clueless about the tsunami that the internet would represent, and suddenly having to build sort of that land bridge over from the octal addresses, 76703, 3022 was my address, over to
into your brain.
It burned into my brain. That's true. In fact, it turned out I was given free time in exchange for helping out. That was the nature of the sysop ship. I think over a period of years I rang up, not having to pay it, but they still kept track, over $250,000 of connect time. So I'll never get those hours back. In any case, I'd like to now thank you all for contributing and for those introductions. It's an amazing brain trust we actually have around this table, and I'm sure we'll be able to make good use of it. Let me now turn it over to Daniel Kirshner to talk a little bit about the Open Internet Order. What does this thing say?
Okay, thank you. Can we put up the PowerPoints, please? There we go. Oh, yeah, we can hand those around. We actually have copies of the rules, which is what I'm going to be talking about. And as you'll see, they fit on one page if you make it double-sided. So,
I think, too, we actually have agendas. Might as well circulate them. And if there's spare copies, everyone else is welcome to it as well.
So yeah, Jonathan asked me to talk a little bit. He thought it would be a good one of the good ways to launch our conversation to actually talk about what the rules themselves say. So I'll say a little bit about myself as I introduce myself. I'm the designated federal officer, and I'm going to be working with Deborah and with Henning and with Jonathan and Dave Clark on setting the work program for the committee. I know that many of you probably already know these rules very well, but hopefully, like a brilliant work of art, when you look at it again, you'll see something new. So.
Again, we set the bar very high around here.
I was going to talk a little bit about the committee, which is actually mentioned in the order itself. So the committee that you're on is established under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and it was created under the order itself, which the rules from that order is what I'm going to be talking about. And then I wanted to sort of quote a little bit of the language describing this committee in the order, and I think the chairman referenced some of this. It says the committee will aid the commission in tracking developments with respect to the freedom and openness of the Internet, in particular with respect to the issues discussed in this order. The committee will report to the commission and make recommendations it deems appropriate. And that, I think, is at paragraph 162, if you want to look that up. Okay. The order, a little bit about the order itself. It was adopted in December 2010, as the chairman said, about 18 months ago. It went into effect last year. The order itself runs many pages, and it does things that orders like this have to do. It sets out the basis for the authority of the commission to issue the order. It goes through the various comments that were submitted during the rulemaking process, and it explains why the commission made the decisions it made in issuing the order. Though the order itself runs for many pages, the rules themselves are very brief, and they're less than 2 pages, which I think you now have. And I'm going to actually focus a little bit on the text of those rules today. The chairman, when he voted to adopt the rules, he described them as, and I think he used this language when he spoke earlier, enforceable high-level rules of the road to preserve freedom and openness. I think that's a good description, and one thing I want to focus on in that description is the word preserve. One thing that you'll see when you look at the order is the notion that these are preserving pre-existing sort of foundational principles. So on to the rules. The first rule always is the purpose. This is the statement of the purpose. And again, you'll see that word preserve. To preserve the Internet as an open platform enabling consumer choice, freedom of expression, end user control, competition, and the freedom to innovate without permission. And I'm actually going to start at the end of the rules. Actually, I realized the wrong. It's actually Rule 8.11, not 8.1. And that's the definitions, which I think are sort of necessary to look at before you look at the rules themselves. So this is the definition of broadband Internet access service. And this definition is really crucial because the rules apply to providers of broadband Internet access service. So the scope of this definition really sets out and defines the scope of the rules. Every word on the slide is pretty important, but there are a few things I want to point out here. First, the definition focuses on the capabilities provided, not the infrastructure. So in other words, this doesn't just apply to services that deliver information in IP. In fact, if you read through the order, you'll see it's clear that services can be delivered in IP and not qualify as broadband Internet access service. The order talks about specialized services or certain services that share capacity with broadband Internet access service over providers' last mile services, but differ from broadband Internet access service. And the order points to existing facilities-based VoIP and Internet protocol video offerings as examples. Another thing I want to point out here is the last sentence, which is this term also encompasses any service that the Commission finds to be providing a functional equivalent of the service described in the previous sentence or that is used to evade the protections set forth in this part. And you'll see that the sort of substance of the definition itself is a mass market retail service by wire or radio that provides the capability to transmit data to and receive data from all or substantially all Internet endpoints, including any capabilities that are incidental to and enable the operation of the communication service, but excluding dial-up Internet access service. These are the definitions of fixed broadband Internet access service and mobile broadband Internet access service. And this is important because you'll see, and I'm sure you already know, that the rules apply differently, or there are different rules for fixed and mobile broadband Internet access service. And then the final definition is reasonable network management. And it says a network management practice is reasonable if it is appropriate and tailored to achieving a legitimate network management purpose, taking into account the particular network architecture and technology of the broadband Internet access service. This definition is important because, as you'll see, the rules provide exceptions for reasonable network management practices. These exceptions are recognition that broadband providers need meaningful flexibility to manage their networks to deal with congestion, security, and other issues. Okay, now on to the 3 rules. The first rule is transparency. A person engaged in the provision of broadband Internet access service shall publicly disclose accurate information regarding the network management practices, performance, and commercial terms of its broadband Internet access services, sufficient for consumers to make informed choices regarding use of such services, and for content application, service, and device providers to develop, market, and maintain Internet offerings. You can say that this sets out transparency requirements at a pretty high level. For example, the rule talks about network management practices and the required to disclose those. The order provides some more discussion about what these rules require in some more detail, and sets out examples of the kinds of information that need to be disclosed. And we've also issued some supplemental guidance after the issuance of this rule, going into some more detail. The second rule is the no blocking rule, and this is divided up into a no blocking rule for fixed broadband and a no blocking rule for mobile broadband. So I've broken them into 2 slides. For fixed broadband, it says a person engaged in the provision of fixed broadband Internet access service insofar as such person is so engaged shall not block lawful content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices subject to reasonable network management. Again, note the phrase at the end, subject to reasonable network management. And then I'll go on to the no blocking mobile version. A person engaged in the provision of mobile broadband Internet access service insofar as such person is so engaged shall not block consumers from accessing lawful websites subject to reasonable network management, nor shall such person block applications that compete with the provider's voice or video telephony services subject to reasonable network management. The order talks at great length why the Commission chose to treat mobile and fixed broadband differently at the point in time when the order was issued. The order acknowledges differences between mobile and fixed broadband, such as unique technical issues involving spectrum and mobile networks, the stage and rate of innovation in mobile broadband, and market structure. Another key factor was that one of the largest mobile providers was providing 4G service using wireless spectrum subject to openness conditions adopted in connection with the auction of that spectrum. So there already were openness conditions on the use of some of the spectrum. And here's a slide just sort of breaking out the no blocking rules for fixed and mobile. This is the third and final rule, no unreasonable discrimination. It covers, providers of broadband Internet access service, and says that such providers shall not reasonably discriminate in transmitting lawful network traffic over consumers' broadband Internet access service. Reasonable network management shall not constitute unreasonable discrimination. Notice that one thing off the bat to notice is that this rule only applies to fixed broadband Internet access service. This rule was grounded in the principle that no gatekeeper, public or private, should have the power to pick winners and losers on the Internet. This prohibition was clearly designed to cover activities like pay-for-priority arrangements involving fast lanes for some companies and not others. And again, note the statement that reasonable network management shall not constitute unreasonable discrimination. And then this is just for completeness' sake. This is an important slide, but I don't know if we need to discuss it in detail here. It just basically talks about how these rules interact with other laws and considerations.
Got it. Thank you, Daniel. I should ask, understanding, of course, that Daniel doesn't have authority to speak for the powers that be on anything that it doesn't already speak for itself on. Are there any questions on this? Yes, Jen.
So obviously the term reasonable network management is understandably vague. I'm just curious if there's any notion of who decides what's reasonable and what's not, or if there's a discussion of what might constitute reasonable and what might not.
Yes, there's an extensive discussion in the order itself about that term. So one thing I think probably the best place to start is to look at the order. I think it runs from paragraph 80 to paragraph 92 of the order, and there's a sort of extensive discussion of how reasonable network management would be understood or determined by the commission.
Got it. The director.
Compliance guide, and it kind of went into some details about some of the things like what's reasonable network management. Does that apply only to, I presume that only applies to what entities that are designated as small entities?
Yes, I'm not sure. This is something, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, I just saw this yesterday.
Okay.
It's small entity compliance guide, preserving the open internet broadband industry practices.
Okay.
It was released in May 9, 2012. I'd never even
heard of it. It's probably just further advisory guidance.
Right.
So, usually with such documents, they're useful beyond even what they necessarily are directed toward in terms of the way they discuss the rules. But I can't speak to that specifically. Yeah.
If you can send around a link to that.
Sure.
We're going to have a set of resources that we'll be curating onward. It'd be great to start gathering stuff like that.
Sure.
Great. Thanks. Harvey?
Back in the order,
when
the order was being developed, there was obviously that big debate about the differences between fixed and mobile. And as we were involved in that, what we understood was at some point we would come back and revisit, the commission would come back and revisit the applicability of the broader rules to the mobile sector at sometime in the future to see how things developed. And I would just maybe a question that maybe we will address later, but some of that future has already happened right now. We're there now. I'm wondering how that will play out with some of our work here.
I do see that you are slated to be a member of the Mobile Broadband Working Group. So my understanding would be the group might well be looking to first canvass what the developments have been, and then maybe later see what the implications are. I don't know, Daniel, if you have anything.
No, I do think that and this was specifically in the Open Internet order. When it talks about this committee, it talks about two areas that were subject to significant debate at the time the order was adopted, and that this committee would be sort of especially tasked with looking at. One is what you just mentioned, the treatment of mobile broadband and distinctions between the treatment of mobile broadband and fixed broadband, and the other area is the specialized services area. So those are two areas that sort of specifically called out that the mandate's very broad. So I guess, in other words, that the discussion of what's happened in the what was the future at the time that the order was adopted and is now the past is certainly not only appropriate but sort of a specific charge for this committee.
Any other questions right now? Oh yes, Matthew.
Quick question about how are these rules going to be information going to be collected on compliance with these rules, and then potential enforcement of any violations by ISPs of these rules? How's that process going to work?
So, there's a sort of general process in place with the commission when we have rules in effect. We have an enforcement bureau people can make complaints about violations. They can submit, people can go on our website and submit informal complaints or call up somebody at the commission. People can also submit formal complaints, and the Enforcement Bureau will look at those, complaints as it does complaints about violations of other rules that are in effect from the commission and proceed accordingly.
If that's everything, why don't we now turn to David Clark for some thoughts, including perhaps, I understand, on the meaning of the word open, how that has evolved over time.
Jonathan asked me if I would say a few words, maybe going back in history. He sent me that email yesterday, so this is a not quite off the cuff, but sort of. And I thought maybe I would talk about the word open because...
Now, David, you said you were preparing for this since 1974. So.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But back then we didn't use the word open. It's not really a part of our language. We understood generality, and computer scientists always worship the god of generality, but we didn't say open. And in fact, if you go back to the end paper that I wrote with Jerry Salzer and Dave Reed, which has been used, I would say, as a sort of a religious tract far beyond what it will sustain if you're a strict constructionist, I believe I verified that paper doesn't contain the word open either.
You've really gone multidisciplinary by invoking constitutional law principles, religious texts, and computer science all in one sentence.
Next sentence, I'll try pornography. So what that paper was about was correctness, and it's actually a very narrow objective. It wasn't even really performance. If you read it, it was correctness. Clearly, open is in play by 1994. There's a study that several of us did for the National Research Council, the CSTB. We had a study in which we described something called the Open Data Network, the ODN. That book contains a hourglass figure, which has been used in lots and lots of circumstances, although I was not the first person. That's not the first place to have drawn an hourglass. We drew it there, and that picture's gotten a lot of traction. What's interesting about that report is that we talked about the open data network, and what was contested back then was not the word open. What was contested back then in 1994 was the word internet. The representatives on that National Academy Committee from industry, primarily telephone companies and cable companies, were clear in their minds that the thing today we call the internet, the thing back then we called the internet, was not the thing that was going to be the commercial success. It would be a successor to the internet that would be designed by them to meet their kinds of needs, but those needs did not preclude openness. Openness was clearly on the table. So in the report, we couldn't call it the open internet. We had to call it the open data network, and I wasn't allowed to put the word internet on that hourglass slide if you go back and look at it. Now openness has taken on a sort of a religious tone, and so I want to just say that open is sort of a slippery word. It actually doesn't mean much. I have cynically observed that open is a word you put in front of something else to create a noun phrase if you're trying to imply a positive value. So you talk about open borders, open conversation, open countenance. We could argue about open relationship, but it's obvious that it's the opposite of closed. Closed is a bad word, open is a good word. But in fact, open is not a goal, nor is network neutrality a goal. Open is a word that you use, perhaps not an hourglass, it's sort of a bow tie, that hooks together a sense of requirements on one side. And the chairman talked about some of them. Innovation, economic investment, both in the network itself and in the applications, freedom of discourse, civil society. There's a whole bunch of requirements you have on one side, and then there's a whole bunch of specifics you have on the other side, either rules or technological decisions. And open is this word that we use to tie them together. And sometimes it's a very convenient shorthand, but sometimes it actually obscures the linkage between the decisions you're making on the one hand and the requirements you're trying to meet on the other. So I'm going to suggest that we will clearly continue to use the word open in this conversation, just as we will continue to use the word internet. But I think it's very important that we go back periodically and tag up what are the deeper problems, what are the requirements we're actually addressing. Are we being sensitive to the needs of various stakeholders to have the right economic incentives to innovate, to invest, to improve? Are we being sensitive to the larger social constructs, the civil society, the discourse? And of course, although the FCC is a domestic organization, at this moment there are profound international issues that are arising in this space. That's why I hired a political scientist. We're studying how the internet is being managed in China, and it's not your mother's internet, nor is it ours. So I guess that the historical message I would bring here is that we've been using opens, at least since 1994, as a code word for a basket of requirements on the one hand and technical decisions and rulemaking on the other. And we should not focus on open as the objective. We should be looking at the relationship between those two sides, and we should therefore use open as a code word, but carefully.
Thanks. And as you say, the Internet hourglass is sort of legend now. Have you written up the Internet bow tie anywhere, or is that?
No, I haven't. Well, I did write a cynical article about the word open, but I haven't published it anywhere because I couldn't figure out who would want to publish a cynical article on the use of the word open.
Given the word open, it's ironic that you have not published it. Very good.
Next topic, please.
And if we do committee swag, we could perhaps have bow ties that were anyway. Okay. Questions, comments, reactions before we turn to the working groups? Anything anybody wants to say?
I guess the one, I thought very thoughtful comments, Dave, and appreciate them.
Just angle the mic a little.
One thing which is,
aim the mic at yourself.
The fact that the thing that we call the internet now is an international phenomenon is one thought that occurred to me as I was coming down on the train these days. And so, what we do in this country, it has some bearing, but obviously not complete bearing on what happens in the rest of the world. And I don't know exactly how to factor that into this, but certainly the situation in China is distressing to most of us.
Any other thoughts? Yes,
I think this one is really a very fundamental thought. We as a U.S. group operating under the United States Federal Communications Commission and talking about the internet, which knows no bounds, it becomes an interesting question. I think we should spend a little bit more time talking about here. And you've correctly identified the challenges that are occurring in the way the internet is being handled in one country, and there are others that are similarly working towards those ends. But I think it would be useful, even within this body at the outset, to talk a little bit about how we circumscribe what we do here in this very global context of the internet.
And given that the Open Internet Order expresses certain principles, some of which, as I think Daniel emphasized, were more about maintaining rather than rolling back or somehow clashing with any widespread current practices here. It would be very interesting to kind of canvass around the world where the principles of the Open Internet Order might really have bite, where there's stuff going on, and China would be a flagship example of it, for which it would be probably in direct conflict with the principles behind the order. Yeah.
But having said that, it is within scope to talk about that for this forum.
I don't see why not. I mean, as David says, this is a global world, and the essence of the network is global.
Yeah.
So, and there are probably lessons to be learned, not just principles that could be applied, but lessons to be learned elsewhere, both positive and negative.
Good.
Can I respond?
Yeah, sure, David.
We are an advisory committee, and I think it's up to us to decide within the scope of the orders from the Commission, because technically we are our agenda is defined by the FCC. But I think within that, we ought to be proactive in deciding what advice we should give to the FCC. It's up to them to decide how to take it. And I think one of the things we can reasonably address is what are these issues that can be dealt with domestically? And what are these issues in which any attempt to deal with them domestically will entangle you in international concerns? So in the larger technical advisory committee, for example, there was a lot of discussion of IPv6.
Right.
And I think there's actually not a lot you can do domestically to encourage the deployment of IPv6 because it really is an international problem. And I think you can't talk about IPv6 domestically and act as if you're going to move unilaterally. So that's outside the scope of this committee, but I think it's an example of a place where you have to understand the international context if you're going to try to do something, even if the scope of your own rulemaking is domestic.
Sounds great. So why don't we walk through the 4 working groups right now and, again, have a chance to talk about what we see as potential areas for each group to focus on. And I was hoping that each working group chair could say a couple words, no doubt of the character of sort of just heard about this not that long ago, back of the envelope kind of thing. And I wonder if Jen Rexford might be willing to lead us off with the mobile broadband working group.
Thanks, John.
Also, we have a PowerPoint with the sort of description for somebody.
So the mobile broadband group, which I'm chairing, is going to be looking at a number of the issues I think that came up in the discussion just in the last few minutes about which aspects of the Open Internet Order should be applying to mobile broadband providers, and also issues of how to document traffic management practices and measure whether networks are abiding by them. And I'm sure we'll, as a group, figure out a number of other issues to discuss on that topic.
Any questions or thoughts on what the mobile broadband
I just
group?
come back to the point that's been made several times by Harvey and myself. I think one of the interesting areas is to what extent mobile broadband now ties to fixed broadband as the two couple. And so I think that's something that we have an obligation to look at, whether those are more closely coupled now than they were 18 months ago. For example, as you move to smaller and smaller cells, do those actually now require that whatever you do on the mobile network, you have to propagate back through a wired network, and that wired network looks very much like a wired broadband access network. So I think that is an idea that I think is ripe to explore in the spirit of, in the next 3 to 5 years, that's what mobile broadband will look like in large part, and we should get ahead of that issue, I think.
I guess part of that question, too, is there's increasing number of instances where you see pass-off from a fully mobile network to one that has Wi-Fi for the last 25 feet, but is otherwise then anchored to a fixed network.
Exactly.
And to the extent that there might appear differences between the two, it can be a rather unusual experience if you're using a mobile device. It's suddenly connecting through Wi-Fi because it can, and that has one set of circumstances, and then suddenly it's back to...
Very well said. And if you want to use those two optimally, which would be the best use of spectrum, it would be odd if, in fact, you didn't allow some continuity between those two experiences in a way that was consistent. Right?
Yeah.
Well said. Yep.
Other thoughts? Yep. Russ?
In the standard space, we're also seeing things going on to merge the two. If you have radio access to both a 3G network and a Wi-Fi network, maybe you send some of your packets both ways and take advantage of the aggregate. And so if the same TCP connection is sending its packets down both of those, as is being studied in the IETF now in multipath TCP, you get a very interesting thing if the packets that go left and the packets go right have different rules.
So it's not kind of channel bonding or something. It could be, wow.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to take this almost exactly the same place. But while I understand contextually and historically why there was a separation between fixed and wireless for the future, I think the thread that you're hearing is I fail to see the distinction as we move a decade out. So I think that will be one of the things for us to consider, even as we have our mobile group. The mobile group, in my mind, will cover all instances of connection as we move forward. And there are all sorts of mix and match scenarios that are being formed. And even as I enter my office, I actually still do plug in my computer, but I also am wirelessly connected, and I never know which connection is predominant, nor do I care.
Yeah.
But
a wrestling match sometimes to persuade the computer to use the broadband connection. It's not Wi-Fi. I find a Faraday cage is the last resort.
I have one of those across the hall. So.
Yeah. Very good. Any other thoughts on this, or Jen? Any other questions you want to put to the group, or? No? Yep, Harvey.
Obviously in the network, and I don't have an answer for this, and maybe others might have a view. It's really be interesting to see that. But within that mobile broadband space, what's the role, or how do we think about the OS layer and the practices that happen past the network in that layer, because they're equally important to the end user at the end of the day.
Uh-huh.
And so it's almost like saying I'm going to, well, forget the metaphors, but that's the question. I'd be interested to see how that plays out and thoughts on that.
I'd like to extend that point. I very much agree that, as you know, with some of the comments made, one of the ways that the device selects which network it attaches to. So to your point earlier, Charles, we have to be aware that to some extent it's not even the network operator selecting which network you attach to. The device plays a role in making that as a self-selection. So I think we have to go far enough to say, does the principle extend to the OS or the device, that there should be a degree of selection by the user as to which network they attach to based on the demands of the application and their desired service. And I don't think there should be an ability for the device to sort of self-determine that without some other input. I mean,
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing. I mean, we're tending to talk about the end user or end applications, but I think the relationship of a cellular data provider to some virtual provider that might be using their infrastructure is probably another topic we'll want to take up.
Great.
I just wanted to throw a quick one to extend on what Harvey was talking about. From my perspective, it looks like a lot of the restrictions to network openness are applied at the software layer through carrier control of the phone device itself and limiting what you can do with the data. You know, and I'm a fixed provider, and we see a lot of people that are, trying to use the Wi-Fi offload and basically seeing some of that being monetized, through the use of small cells in the house where carriers are charging extra for them to actually access the Wi-Fi and use that for cellular calls in the house. And I think that there's a consideration, there should be a consideration there for the applications that actually run and having a certain amount of openness as opposed to being as locked down as they are right now.
Yep.
I guess I have just one comment, and I'm certainly not an expert in mobile broadband, but one of the differences, I guess, that applies in mobile broadband networks is that radio is fundamentally different than fixed connections, and essentially one user's ability to harm another user or the network is much greater in that environment, and so and there's a lot of sort of complexity associated with that aspect of managing that resource that doesn't typically arise at anywhere near the same degree in fixed networks, and so that I think there will be some discussion that probably occurs around that,
and which indeed accounts for the very self-conscious differential treatment in the rule. And why? Yeah. Great. Okay, the next working group is Economic Impacts of Open Internet Frameworks. Shane Greenstein has agreed to chair that. He's unfortunately not able to be here today, but he has agreed to peel off from his National Bureau of Economic Research conference. I think he got dispensation to be present by telephone during that working group meeting. So it has a kind of odd Charlie's Angels flavor to it, I think, for those who remember that. Yes, exactly. So sort of his leadership will emanate from the box on the table, but given what we've been talking about, it's actually all too appropriate. And in the meantime, I think this working group may also be one that lends itself most to taking up some of the international issues to be looking at comparative impacts of different regimes, perhaps, around the world, both technical and regulatory. And it may also be the most amenable to looking at data collection and asking the meta question of what kind of data would be helpful to evaluate the impacts of existing rules, of existing frameworks, or even potentially different ones, whatever those might look like. So I think that's at least some of what that group may be looking into. Are there other thoughts or questions on that group, aware that Shane isn't here? Yep, Kevin?
So I want to repeat something that Harvey and Marcus said on the last one.
Yes.
For this one is really as we look at the various decisions or recommendations that we make, really the user experience is end-to-end, and we really want to make sure that anything related to measurement, OS layers, server geography, adaptive bitrate technologies, not only look at the capabilities, but the network efficiencies of how services are delivered going forward.
That'd be great for this group. Anything else? So why don't we turn to the third group, specialized services, which David Clark, you will be chairing that.
Specialized services is another one of these terms of art. I pointed out that in 1994, the term that was contested in the conversation about the open data network was not the term open, but the term internet. And in some respects, special services is outside the scope of the internet because it relates to those things that a facilities owner may do with their facilities which are not the internet. And we know, for example, in a cable system, most of the capacity is used to deliver internet television. Now, whether you call that a specialized service or you just call it not internet, again, we're going to have to do some definitional clarification as part of this working group. But I think that we are in a space where there's going to be an interesting intellectual conundrum that has to be answered, and where we really, all of us will benefit from some clarity in the rules of the road, which is when is a specialized service a matter of concern to the FCC. And one can take two extreme positions here, one of which I think is extremely adverse to the encouragement of investment in the infrastructure, which could say, well, the bottleneck facility is not the internet access, the bottleneck facility is the pipe. And so we really ought to be applying regulatory constraints to the pipe. At the other extreme, you could say, well, the only thing we're concerned about is what we call the public internet, and anything you do that's not the public internet is private, so it's really not our business. The linkage, if you go back to the rules, is expressed in sort of harsh terms. If you go back to the definition that Doug put up earlier, broadband internet access service, you catch an interesting sentence at the end, which is to say, this term also encompasses any services, I'm eliding here, the services that is used to evade the protection set forth in this part, which is to say, that evade is a very hostile word. It implies a sort of a malicious intent, and I think that should be taken off the table. But there is a question, when is a special service equivalent in some respect to an internet service, and therefore when should it be seen as being taken into the context, the larger context of the competitive landscape, discrimination context, and so forth. I believe that that's the definitional question that this working group should be trying to work on. I think what the FCC needs now is not, in fact, advice about a rulemaking. I think we need some clarity of definition, some clarity of vocabulary, and a beginning framework to help people think about what's a clearly acceptable thing to be doing, what looks like it might fall under this issue of equivalent service, and how can we begin to refine that area in the middle so that we remove the uncertainty. Uncertainty is a tremendous barrier to investment and innovation. I suspect this will be controversial. Questions? Ooh. I expected tomatoes.
Well, just so you don't feel left out, David, I will ask a question. Is there some sense of trying to be quantitative about what growth of the internet part of the service is required to match the non-internet part of the service, or do you think it's more definitional and quantification is counterproductive given the uncertainty of what the future has in store for us?
My honest answer, and I'd like the group to discuss this, is I'm not sure. The European Commission, BEREC, has actually put forward a regulation that says that they are going to define minimal acceptable, I don't have the language. I do have the language in front of me on my iPad, but I'm not going to try to find it. But they're basically going to define what is a minimal acceptable level of internet service, because they are absolutely concerned that the rise of special services and value-added services will encourage the operators to erode the quality of the basic internet service. They're on record as having said that. They've put a ruling in place that said they're going to monitor it. They intend to do it quantitatively, but I don't think they know how yet. And one of my colleagues at MIT has actually gone to some of their meetings where they are starting to talk about what measurements ought to be done. I'd like to approach this in an open way and say, let's just talk about it. But again, we can look over the fence at what BEREC is doing and say, yeah, well, there are people who are taking different approaches. Let's decide whether we think they're sensible, and we can give advice to the FCC about this.
All right. Next working group, transparency. Russ?
Okay, so the order calls for providers to be transparent about network management practices and other attributes. That's pretty vague, other attributes of their services. But to do so in a way that is comprehensible by the public. So I think we need to help the FCC understand what that might be, comprehensible to the public on these very technical things. At the same time, it's important to do so in a way that doesn't encumber the ability of the providers to preserve their trade secrets and their competitive advantages. So be transparent, but don't tell everything. How far do they have to open the kimono? And I think that's the big thing. The other thing that the working group description says is that we will also examine broader transparency issues. So that's an interesting opening for just about anything, but that includes the developing of accurate data about the network performance and other network characteristics.
Questions or thoughts on this? Michelle?
I mean, based on that last sentence you said, it sounds like there's also an opportunity perhaps for this group to also touch on networks internationally, since the transparency will change region to region. So a different angle on that topic.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I do also think this is another opportunity for some data gathering. So I think you will do some data gathering in that group as well as the economic one. I've actually gone hunting on various ISPs' websites, and I've sent some smart people to go hunting on various ISPs' websites to find their description of their network management practices. And I have to say, they're hard to find, never mind whether they're comprehensible. In many cases, I can't find them. So, step one.
Anything else on transparency? Yep.
Just a quick thing to address Professor Clark's question about that. I think one of the things would be trying to make something that's comprehensible for most people to understand. I mean, I could publish my traffic prioritization rules, but you might want to get a graduate student or a team of them to try and go through and figure out what exactly everything means and what the reasoning for it is. You know, a lot of that's based on the fact that the particular technology we use, we're using fixed wireless, and we've got different levels of service we can provide for it. You know, different spectrum characteristics offer different levels of capacity. So we have to apply network management processes in a different way across many different types of platforms there. So it's awfully. You can tell I'm having a hard time trying to explain it to you right now. It's pretty hard to condense onto a website. It's stuff that's done to make the network work better. The question is, I think getting it to a comprehensible manner is a good thing to get to.
And this is, I think, a good example where one term, namely transparency, really was addressing multiple objectives and different audiences, and recognizing that, for example, transparency serves as a vehicle of enabling consumer choice, which clearly is then targeted towards making a selection between competing providers and choosing the appropriate ISP where available. It is also addressed to application writers of applications that may need to know about these type of things. And it is also addressed, obviously, to the Commission, for example, as it monitors the evolution of Internet services itself. And I think there has been a recognition, and I think this is where the committee could be quite helpful, is that one size, to use that old cliche, does not fit all in this, and that there was a recognition that the kind of disclosure which is appropriate for consumers is probably not sufficient in its technical depth for the other two groups, and vice versa, in the sense of being inappropriately detailed or confusing otherwise. And I don't think there has been, just to remove that discussion, but I don't think there was ever any intent that there had to be exactly one disclosure that had to be addressed from my grandma, my classical stand-in, to Dave's graduate student, because that's just not reasonable.
So it suggests as a threshold matter, the transparency group could be coming up with a small taxonomy of the different types of transparency that capital T transparency might mean, and also understand expressions of it that, as you say, are kind of grandma readable, graduate student readable, computer readable, all that kind of stuff. So, yep, Kevin?
I just wanted to answer Dave's question on my side. Network management on Comcast.net.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't looking on your website, actually. I didn't try to find it for you, so...
Sure. That address again is networkmanagement.comcast.net. Terrific. Thanks. Okay, so I think once we get started with the working groups... Oh, yeah, sorry, Chuck.
So I just have a more general question. So about sort of the process for today and also the process for this body as a whole. So we're going to get some public comment. We're going to have some luncheon. We're going to go off to some breakout sessions. As I pointed out earlier, I can only be at one place at one time. I may be interested in something that's happening in a breakout group that I'm not in. What's the process that we will use to bring back the results of the discussions in the breakout groups to the plenary? What's the process by which these groups decide to do something after we leave and get on the train this afternoon?
Yes.
Will that be discussed at some point today?
In fact, now is a good time.
Okay.
So my thought was that the working groups would convene first to figure out what are the primary questions they want to answer and with what level of priority. So kind of set an agenda for themselves, which already we've seen a flavor of that as a group. And the work can be done asynchronously, right? We have very little time today. This is sort of meet, greet, maybe come up with that tentative agenda, and then be able to work through a mailing list of some kind, traditional email, tried and true, to have a space, if the working group wants it, to assemble resources online and make that as available as the working group feels comfortable to the rest of the committee and to the public at large, if desired. For the future meetings of this committee, for which I anticipate, I think, 3 or 4 per yearly interval, to have some good part of those meetings turned over to the working groups reporting back and having a discussion then as a committee of the whole of what the groups have been doing. And if there's been enough asynchronous communication, there shouldn't be any big surprises. It will be just a chance to talk with much better bandwidth about it. I should also add my thought for future meetings of our committee, and it's only a thought and we can discuss it more on the list that we have for the committee or in different groupings, is that our future meetings be on the road a little bit. We don't always convene back in Washington, D.C., but thinking about holding a meeting in Silicon Valley, holding a meeting perhaps in Boston, for which between me and David we might be able to come up with a venue, maybe New York City, maybe Los Angeles, and maybe Austin, Texas, or, who knows, Chicago, Illinois, Topeka, Kansas, wherever the geographic center of the country is, might be a good place. Or at one of the inter-exchange points could be a nice sort of reminder of what we're all about. So that's one thought, to look at places we can meet around the country, and to the extent, too, that we'll want to be accessible to the public, I think having different physical venues may give us a different flavor that collectively would be more broadly representative of what's going on out there. So that's one thought on just the future meetings. I should also say, to the extent that the working groups encounter open questions that are really thorny and have an empirical dimension, and I think already a couple have come up of that nature, for the working group to be able to send up a flare and say, this is a question for which it would be great to have some answers, we may be able, both through addressing the public at large and to see if we can dragoon a couple graduate students or others into the process, to see if we can make some progress on those questions, which might entail gathering resources. Here's a paper you may not have read or heard of. I come from a zone where I think the median number of readers of a law review article is 0. So, the median law review article receives 0 readers, is what I'm saying. So we all have work to do to... Median, not mean.
I understand. But that means 50% of law review articles are never read.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But when I said it my way, most law people might not know what that means. Now you've fully taken the clothing off the emperor. So, and there's our pornography. So, sorry about that. So my thought is that to the extent the working groups are really taking on larger questions, to have some process to help see where answers may already have been offered or to develop more offers would be good for the working groups.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yep, Jen?
Yeah, a follow-up question related to Chuck's. I guess, first of all, if you could say a little bit about the deliverables of the group as a whole and the working groups.
Yes.
And also what role, if any, outside people should play in our deliberations. And particularly in the group I'm in, there's a lot of outside expertise that might be useful to consult.
Yes.
And I just want to understand what the process is.
So at least we know there are two things. There's what might be a good idea and what we're allowed to do. Yeah. And I think Daniel may be able to weigh in on the latter, if not the former.
With respect to involving other people,
right.
And the working groups can and often do, and other kinds of committees like that, invite people from the outside. There are certain parameters on the Federal Advisory Committee Act, so if questions arise, we can discuss them. But to have other people present viewpoints or join in on discussions, so that's very common and not only acceptable but encouraged. So.
And there may even be lateral groups that can help, like the BTAG and others that could be asked to help out. Yep.
At a mechanical level, I'm assuming that we will set up a mailing list for each of the subgroups, and
yes,
people could agree. People, I think, should be invited to join those lists if they simply want to lurk and find out what's going on. That should be fine.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, the working groups are more to establish more focused responsibility, because it's hard to get stuff done among 21 people, and there is the mythical person year. So the more people you add, the less work that gets done. But it's more than an allocation of responsibility than of somehow privilege or something. Chuck?
Is membership in a group sort of at our individual discretion and capacity for work, or is it the chair of the subgroup's decision, or is it decided based on what was written on the piece of paper?
Do you mean as to who is in each group, or yes. Do you mean... So we had already circulated among the committee suggested working groups, trying to not spread people too thin, or to best harness them. If anybody has a strong feeling about where he or she wants to contribute, I doubt there'd be any issue with that. I do think we should try to strive for some continuity of membership over a period of time. And I think that applies both to the working group composition, so you don't have people constantly moving in and out, so that we can have some cumulative sense of work going on. And it may also apply, too, I think, for the organizations, designees and such. It'd be good to have some continuity, and of course each organization has a principal person named to the committee that's really the person responsible, understanding that there may well be somebody who can't sit in or that isn't available on a given moment and can still have some representation. Yep.
Is there a way that they could be
there be someone, the designee could also be copied or something like that?
Since the work of the groups is not undertaken in secret, I don't think there's any problem with that. And what can be achieved on the client side anyway, we might as well make possible on the server side, if that's helpful, if that makes sense. But again, we just don't want to diffuse responsibility away from the people who are personally named as being part of this committee.
In the spirit of the continuity, as I would like to join mobile broadband, the way you've divided up the idea that this would be the continued demarcation, so in other words, you'd couple transparency and mobile broadband as going on in a joint session, in a session concurrently, and separately the open internet economic impact and specialized service in a second session, non-concurrent with that one. Is that the ongoing assumption? Or are they all concurrent? It wasn't clear to me.
Oh, only for today.
What I meant is in future meetings where we get together and you want continuity, is there a sense that we will do these things in parallel, or they're all concurrent in the working groups?
In parallel and concurrent sound...
Meaning that you could have two meet at one slot and the other two meet at another slot.
That would be ideal. Yeah. Now, we do know we have people assigned to multiple groups.
Exactly.
So as soon as the dust settles, we'll take a look at how possible it is to have any form of concurrent meeting so that we don't have the working groups have to spread out individually. And that is one feature of the current allocations, is that we can do these double concurrencies without too much overlap.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And we don't want to have people sit around either.
No, right.
While because otherwise...
Idle hands make for the devil's work.
So as a practical matter, we'll go off, we'll have these committee meetings. Mailing lists will be set up for each of the subgroups, and perhaps the chairs will send out minutes of what was discussed in those groups so that we can all learn about what topics are being proposed for consideration.
That sounds great.
Is that fair?
Is that okay with the chairs? On behalf of Shane, I say yes. So that was a grumpy yes from David.
Well, it's hard to run a meeting and take notes.
Exactly. We'll find, the chair, of course, has the authority to ask someone within the working group to assist. So,
right.
Yes. Jen?
I was wondering if you could say something about the deliverables for the working groups and
yes.
the group as a whole, and also what's your sense of how often these subcommittees should be meeting, and presumably by teleconference just because of logistical issues. But
yes.
Should this be every 2 weeks, once a month?
I was thinking with one standard deviation every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And maybe more if there's something that's, there will be a natural biorhythm, I think, to the work of the groups.
Right.
But roughly once every 2 weeks, they will make sense.
And then as far as deliverables, what are they?
I think deliverables may require the distillation into written form something, because otherwise it's very evanescent. And we'd like to have something that can accumulate so that to the extent that the committee has an ongoing existence, it's not Groundhog Day. So we want to be able, it's a sort of a Hollywood shout out there, we would like some written product. But that being the case, it shouldn't be any more than necessary to convey the meat of what the working group has found. And we'd be happy to try to come up with what assistance may be needed, either from the commission staff or from some research help, to be able to help develop those products.
And the audience for those reports, I'm trying to understand, is there a timeline, or we're supposed to do something every 6 months, or is it more informal?
I imagine the timeline would be the meetings of the full committee, where there ought to be some quantum of work. And I would think the working groups could either come back to the committee with the biggest puzzles they've encountered. Look, here's the thing that we're trying to reconcile. I mean, David came up with I think a pretty deep dilemma on specialized services. And then there'd be a chance within the full committee to discuss it, and that would also be a marker for the general public, which includes a lot of specialized people and expertise to weigh in. And it may be even that by our next full meeting, we'd have a sense from each group of where it wants to go. I should also add, I think I adverted to it early on, but I think there also ought to be an opportunity if something much more narrow and focused should come up. And in my own mind, I don't have anything specific in mind except that within this space, there can be momentary spikes within these respective communities. It's not like it's kind of front page news usually, but there's momentary spikes of whoa, something's happening here that implicates open internet principles, what's going on? Where I think having a mechanism to assess what's going on, to see if what's being reported is really what's happening, might be a very useful function for the committee. And so to be able to convene an ad hoc working group, and I just would say to anybody, if you see something that might fit this description, to be able to make that suggestion and then figure out from whom to draw for members that might be able to be particularly helpful on that area. My sense is those working groups might have a very short existence. It could be something like a 3-week working group on something that would generate something akin to a frequently asked questions document, meant to simply say, here's the best that we can determine on what's going on. And it may even then become known to those who follow the issues in the trade press and elsewhere as a place to go to kind of get the bottom line. That's my thought on the ad hoc working group, and they may have very short lifespans. Anything else, Michelle?
So in terms of setting the next meetings, are we going to do that today, or are we going to? No.
The thought of trying to pull out all our
calendars,
something akin to Doodle is probably our best friend.
We're going to take a lead and run on it.
Absolutely. So
because people's calendars will fill up. So
yes. So we will circulate very soon after we disperse suggestions for the big group meetings, and I imagine each of the respective chairs will come up with a decent working schedule for their groups.
Terrific.
Sound good? Yep.
Sorry, just a question on the deliverables again.
Yes.
In the formation of the group, it mentions that the group, the advisory committee, will deliver recommendations it deems appropriate to the FCC.
Yes.
Right? Which implies that it could choose not to deliver recommendations, right?
Yes.
So there is no mandatory output of recommendations. So, right. Okay. Just want to make sure I understood that.
And honestly, I wouldn't be in a hurry to deliver recommendations. Now, I know the word hurry can mean different things, but I really see the initial stages of this as getting the lay of the land, setting the agenda of the really good and pressing questions to answer, and doing our best to develop some facts around it. I would not hasten to, run with a recommendation on this, that, or the other thing until we've got that, and until we've developed within the committee some good working relationships, so that,
I agree 100% on that. The next question, though, is what would be the process for actually delivering a recommendation? Say a working group comes up with a proposed recommendation. It would come to this group, and then kind of what happens with it.
I imagine the first resort is going to be the magic word consensus. And rough consensus running code has served well. I know it has its drawbacks. I'm not sure we'll be humming in this group or using all of the IETF's idiosyncrasies. But my thought is, to the extent that the working groups can come up with some ideas, and maybe even, depending on what it is, there may well be, hey, there are two paths here. There's one general approach that looks like this. There's another that looks like that. Within the working group, we have some different thoughts on where that should go. Maybe that's what comes back to the group. And the service we can do is flesh out those different paths and say, look, here's the main reason why there's a strong sense that path number one is good, and here's what people who like path number two. So we'll get consensus where we can. Where we can't, I don't want to have our recommendations be so vague for the purpose of achieving consensus that they don't really mean anything. I mean, we're all in favor of like rainbows and puppy dogs, but I don't want to just have the consensus be around that for consensus's sake. But to the extent that we can, well, I don't mean to assume, by the way, but to be able to map out points of cleavage, I think, can also be useful. And then where we can operate on consensus, we will. I wouldn't want to cross any other bridges there, knowing that this group, while intended to be diverse and representative, and it is, it's not counting by the number who's going where and not. So I guess all the reasons why the IETF rejects, as David Clark coined the phrase, right, kings, presidents, and voting.
I didn't mean it as unalloyed praise.
It's also what? And we're also reminded it's almost noon, so we should turn to public comment before we break. But does that much make sense? Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Let's see if anybody attending the meeting as a member of the public has anything he or she wants to say. There's a microphone up in the front. And also, I don't know if anybody's been following the Twitter stream. We could be sweeping that for the OIAC hashtag to see if there's anything. And feel free as you like to identify yourself or not.
All right. Didn't necessarily want to be the first, but here we are. My name is Jeremy Pesner from Georgetown University. I wanted to just express my appreciation for everyone involved in this. I'm very glad to see that this is happening. I've been getting more and more involved with these issues to the point of going to graduate school for it over the past few years. And the fact that the FCC, as well as all of you who have agreed to be a part of this, are here meeting about this, discussing this, acknowledging that this is an important issue, I think is a very strong step in the right direction, much additionally allowing it to be open to the public so that people like me can see it. You know, as someone who's investigating, stakeholder models as their thesis, I think this is, it's happening right now. And on that note, I guess, I could mention, I'm one of those graduate students. I might be interested in being involved. So I just wanted to say this is looking good.
So you're on the deck of the Californian waiting to see a flare go up. Historical reference. Should we need help, you may well be able to be among those offering some help.
Great.
Thank you. Anything else? So that being the case, let me, on behalf of the committee, thank the FCC staff, Daniel, Deborah Broderson, for helping us out here and pulling this together and keeping us focused and getting it going. Our research associate, Kendra Albert, thank you for helping to pull this together. And my guess is you may well be hearing from Kendra on the lists sort of as one of my designees to be gathering information and helping with things. And I also just want to thank the video people, the streaming folks. I think when I, by the way, decreed that the streaming wasn't happening, I think it was happening for some and not others, so it was not completely down. And it may well have been user error. We won't get into that. And also the closed captioning. It's funny. It has a kind of hypnotic quality to see it going by, but it's incredible. It's far better than what I see in the bar on CNN or something that usually has long pauses in between what Wolf Blitzer is saying. This has been pretty extraordinary, and it must be strange for the closed captioner to be typing his or her own praise in real time as it's going on. So on that very meta note, I call our full committee meeting adjourned and look forward for the committee. We have a lunch delivery in some undisclosed location that will be soon disclosed. And the first pair of working group meetings will be on economic impacts and specialized services. We'll make available what rooms those are in. Daniel, how long are those slated to go for? Do you know? We have, I guess, until 2. So minus the 15 minutes it might take to say hello to each other, do a bio break, and get lunch. We'll do one interval on that, and then since we're all going to be in the rooms where the second one is, you will certainly be alerted when it's time to switch around.
Yeah, I mean, this is the end of the full committee meetings. This is the end of the public.
Correct.
Meeting, but all full committee meetings are public, and I also wanted to say, and all the documents that are circulated will be posted online for the public to see, and also an archive of this meeting will be posted for people who were unable to watch the first part. They can go back and watch it.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you all. I look forward to the work that lies ahead. We've set a very challenging bar for ourselves, and we know there are surprises out there at being the Internet. We look forward to taking it on. Thank you.
2, 4, 3. We should gather everybody else.
Okay.
People gather everybody else.
Great.
There's a couple of them. Would you have a